Hello again. So today in linear programming, we will be dealing with a problem of a channel where the manager would like to determine the best way to allocate the time for 8 p.m. to 8:30 p.m. news broadcast. So here the decision variable would be that to determine the number of minutes of broadcast time for the local news, international news, weather news, and sports news. Will be our four decision variables, which we can write it like this: x1, x2, x3, and x4. Further, it states that over the 30 minutes broadcast, 10 minutes are set aside for advertising. So we will not be considering 10 minutes here to solve our problem. Like we have to take aside the 10 minutes. And then it further says that the station broadcast states that at least 15% of the time available should be devoted to the local news coverage. So 15%. From the 20 minutes, we will be taking at least 15% of the time for the local news. And then it says the time devoted to the local news and the international news must be must be 50% of the total broadcast time. And then the time devoted to the weather must be less than or equal to the time devoted to the sports segment. The fourth constraint would be the time devoted to the sports segment should be no longer than the total time spent on the local and international news. And at last, it says at least 20% of the time should be devoted to the weather segment. Okay, so these will be our constant. And then it says that production costs for per minute are $300 for local news, 200 for international, and $100 for weather, and $100 for sports. So we are dealing with the minutes unit and then formulate a linear programming that can minimize the total cost. So this will be the minimizing problem in where we have to find out the number of minutes of broadcast time. So for the objective function, as it is a cost minimization problem, so we will be writing the last line of the question, which was 300 for x1, 200 for x2, $100 for x3, and $100 for x4. And for the constant, so here we are quite familiar that the total time we have to cover is within 20 minutes. 10 minutes were set aside for the advertisement. So we can write at all four variables minutes are equals to 20 minutes. And then further it says that at least 15% of the time available should be devoted to local news. So 15% of 20 minutes can is actually 3, or we can write like this: x1 0.15 x1 plus x2 of the total time, x3 x4. But we know the total time here, so we can simply write 3 here. It's just whether you are using this way or this way, you will get the same answer. And then it says that the local news and the international news must be at least 50% of the total broadcast time. So here we can write like x1 plus x2 is at least 50% of 20 minutes would be 10 minutes. And then it says that the weather must be less than or equal to the time devoted to the sports segment. So we can write like this: weather is x3, and here the symbol we will use is greater than and equals to x4. or we can move this to 1 in one side and write like x3 minus x4 is greater than or equals to 0. So these are the four constraints so far. Time devoted to the sports segment should be no longer than the total time spent on the local news and international news. So we can write like x4 is not greater than x1 plus x2. Or we can write like x4 minus x1 minus x2 less than and equals to 0. Okay, and for the last constraint, it says that at least 20% of the time should be devoted to the weather segment. So the weather segment is x3 and it should be greater than or equals to the 20% of 20 would be 4. So here it is. Lastly, a non-negative constant that are x1, x2, x3, and x4, all the decision variables should be a non-negative value. So here we are done with the working. Let's move to the Excel now. So now, keeping in mind our working, we can easily fill these tables. So for the cost, it is 300 here, 200 here, 100, and then 100. Our first is total time, which is 1, 1, 1, 1, and that is equals to 20. Then our second constraint is 1, and it is here 3. Then our third constraint is 1, 1 here, and then 10 here. And then our fourth constraint is 1 here and minus 1 here, and then 0. And fifth is 1 for x4, minus 1 for x1, and minus 1 for x2. And it is also here 0. And lastly, x3 is 1, and here we say it's 0. Okay, so the objective function, the total minutes that we have to calculate, we will be doing sum product function for these three and a decision variable that we can log them. Done. And for the left side equation, we can write sum product for this array and then our decision variable. And we will log them as well and just simply drag them down. Alright, so here it's done. Now let's move to the Excel solver. Here we can set our objective function to be this. It's a minimization problem and our decision variables to be these four. And now our subject to constraint. This should be equals to this, add, and then these two will be greater than and equals to these two, add, and then the x2 will be less than and equals to these two, add, and then finally this will be greater than and equals to this. Alright, so our constraints are set. It is a linear programming function, and then now solve. No errors, so it means it's going smoothly, and we get the answer now, which is 3,300 total cost, and our total minutes for each segments are 3 for local news, 7 for international, 5 for weather, and 5 for sports. So now it's done in Excel. We can solve this in R as well. So well, now in R, let's check if our package is installed. I'll be solve where it is. And now let's make a model. .lp. There are 0 rows and 4 columns. And then our objective function is 300, 200, 100, and 100. And then now our constraint, which are model, comma, let's repeat because every variable have single value. So we will just make this function right equals to and then 20. The another constraint we have model C repeat one variable and 0 to all three. It is greater than and equals to comma 3. Okay, and then the third one, here it's 1 comma 1. Let's make our indexes, which will be 1, 2, greater than equals to 10. Fourth one is x3 minus x4. So we will make our 1 comma minus 1 into x is 3. Like it means we are assigning 1 minus 1 to column 3 and 4 for x3 and x. So it's less than and equals to 0. Okay. And then our fifth constraint minus 1 comma minus 1 comma 0 comma 1. So we have all four variables here, less than and equals to 0. And lastly, our constraint x is equals to 3, comma, greater than and equals to 4. Okay, so our constraint is done. Here we have a error in second one. Just need to add one bracket here and remove from the last. Okay, So our constraints are done. And then we will print our model. Print model. Now solve it. So yeah, it's coming 0. Means everything is good so far. Okay, now let's paste our statement. The cost is get objective. Model. So yes, we are having 3,300, and then we can make a data frame for a segment. Local news, international news, weather, okay, and then lastly sports, time and minutes. We have in now get dot variables from our model. Okay, then now run it. Okay, so here we have our local news 3, international news 7, weather 5, and sports 5. Exactly what we got in Excel. Well, it's done now. Let me know if you have any problem in the comment section. Thank you.